The question fluttered through my mind like a moth drawn to the dim light of my living room. It was simple, but the implications loomed heavy on my heart. Am I the asshole for charging my adult children rent? I never imagined this is where I would find myself at 55, standing at the crossroads of nurturing love and harsh reality. My children, Claire and Josh, had both moved back in after college, faced with a tight job market and student loans that loomed like clouds ready to burst. It felt like just yesterday I was sending them off into the world, filled with ambition and dreams, and now the stack of bills, once a distant whisper, was suddenly a roiling shout that demanded to be heard. I loved my children fiercely, but the reality of our situation was different now. My modest home, decorated with family photos that were practically engraved in my heart, was quickly becoming a shared refuge rather than a home. Things shifted, however, when the conversation turned to finances one evening while we surveyed my faded kitchen, once filled with laughter and now littered with remnants of takeout dinners. I broached the subject lightly, almost gingerly, trying to extricate myself from the churning feeling of guilt that wound tightly in my gut. You know, it's not that we can't help each other, I started, but maybe we should think about small contributions for living here. Claire, always the more outspoken of the two, rolled her eyes, casting a glance at Josh, who sat with his head buried in his phone, blissfully unaware. Seriously, Mom? Rent? We're trying to find our footing. She replied, exasperation cutting through her voice like a knife. I felt my heart sink as Josh chimed in, softening the blow with, we're still your kids, you know. Initially, I shrugged off their anger, convincing myself it stemmed from the stress of their own financial burdens, yet the guilt lingered like a shadow. The thought that I might be seen as cold or unloving gnawed at me. My thoughts spiraled, had I failed them by expecting them to contribute to the household? But then, another voice in my head reminded me of the sacrifices I had made. I had worked extra shifts to give them what they needed, and it dawned on me that this was about preparing them for the realities of adulthood, not about making me less of a mother. Still, I wrestled nightly with the decision, my journal filled with poignant reflections on whether love and responsibility could coexist without one overshadowing the other. It was during a heated argument a few days later that it all boiled over, my attempts at calm being met with more resentment. You say you're teaching us, but this feels more like punishment, Claire shouted, tears in her eyes. I held my breath, the weight of her distress settling heavily on my shoulders. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about money, it was about trust and recognition. I'm not punishing you. I want you both to thrive. I want you to prepare for the world outside these walls, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. The room became engulfed in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. It was clear I needed to reconsider the way forward. After much soul-searching, I decided to propose a compromise that would allow us to keep our familial bond intact. The very next day, I gathered my children and talked through my thoughts, removing the label of rent and instead framing it as a living contribution, focusing on what they could help with, whether it was chores or a small monthly amount that would go toward shared costs. To my surprise, they listened, the tension in the room gradually ebbing as we discussed our expectations with open hearts. So it's not about just money, right? It's teamwork? Josh asked, his eyes lighting up with understanding. I nodded fervently, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. We moved forward with boundaries but also with a renewed sense of cooperation, and I marveled at the transformation that occurred, realizing we were not simply roommates navigating rent but rather a family redefining our dynamics together. As the weeks turned into months, I discovered that this change not only eased my financial burden but also rekindled a sense of shared purpose among us. Conversations returned to the table, laughter emanated from our shared moments, and in those evenings spent together, it felt as if we were finding our way back, stitching back together what was nearly frayed. The idea of charging them rent became not a source of resentment but a catalyst for deeper connection. In hindsight, I didn't just charge them, I opened the door to joint stewardship of our lives, an adjustment that allowed us to step forward together rather than apart. As for updates, it's been almost a year since the paradigm shift, and I'm heartened to say Claire now has an internship that could lead to a full-time job, while Josh is earning his keep through freelance gigs. They still contribute to household expenses, each month passing me their share with pride, as if each note exchanged is more than just money, but a message that reads, we've got this, together. And as I sit in the same faded kitchen, watching them grow into the people I always hoped they would be, I realize this journey has taught me as much as it has taught them. Am I the asshole? Perhaps once, but I've come to understand that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the strongest connections. As I sit in that faded kitchen, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows on the table where we gather for our makeshift family meetings, I reflect on how our home has transformed over the past few months. When Josh and Emily moved in, there was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of expectation and uncertainty. I had been battling my own insecurities and regrets about charging them rent, fearing it would disrupt our bond. Yet, every time I see them, filled with determination. As they balance schoolwork with part-time jobs, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Each evening, as we share our meals, the laughter echoes in the corners of the room, wrapping around us like a warm blanket, dispelling any lingering doubt I had initially held about my decision. It had been Josh who first approached me with concern about finances after losing his last full-time job. He spoke earnestly about wanting to contribute more rather than feel like a burden. "I don't want you to struggle because of me," he had said, that familiar spark of responsibility igniting in his eyes. How could I argue with that? Emily followed suit, her spirit equally fired up, insisting that she too wanted to pitch in, to contribute to the household in a way that felt meaningful. It was then that I realized this was about more than just money, it was about empowerment. With the rent agreement in place, I made it abundantly clear that their contributions would be saved toward a future goal, perhaps toward their educational aspirations or an eventual escape of their own, helping to ensure they wouldn't find themselves completely reliant on me once they stepped into the wider world. Each time I handed them a receipt showing their contributions, I would joke, "Look at you, you're practically business owners now." Following those jokes were serious discussions about budgeting and saving. They would listen intently, their eyes bright, eager to absorb the advice, while I shared tales from my own youth, trying to weave in lessons learned as I stumbled through life. Those evenings began to intertwine with deeper conversations about dreams, fears, and the kind of people they envisioned themselves becoming. With every discussion, I could feel our relationship evolving, both as a parent and as individuals seeking to understand one another. One rainy afternoon, however, things took a challenging turn. Emily returned home distraught, her usual spark dulled. "Mom, I don't know if I can continue doing this. It feels like everything is piling on top of me," she admitted, falling onto the couch, her voice strained and defeated. I joined her on the couch, pulling the fuzzy blanket over us as we settled into the silence that accompanied her heavy words. The weight of missed assignments and looming deadlines pressed on her like an ocean wave, and I could see the hope in her eyes flicker momentarily. "What if we adjust a bit? Rent doesn't always have to be paid in full," I offered gently. "Your well-being comes first. It's okay to ask for help." My words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, silence enveloped us before she finally nodded, a small smile breaking through the storm clouds. As the weeks rolled by, we found new rhythms, discussing every tweak and adjustment we made to our agreements candidly. Josh, too, began to share his own struggles more openly, confessing moments of loneliness and his fear of never reaching the ambitions he carried. It was during one of these powerful exchanges that I understood the true essence of decisions made from love. Not only did they learn responsibility, but they also discovered vulnerability and space for genuine dialogue, something I had always longed for us to possess. We emerged stronger as a family, moved forward by empathy and mutual respect, acknowledging our individual journeys without losing sight of our shared path. In this warm cocoon of familiarity and love, I've realized that our home isn't just a physical space, it's a sanctuary carved from our shared experiences, successes, and collective heartaches. The question of whether I was the asshole lingers somewhere in the back of my mind, but it has transformed from a painful inquiry into an echo of a lesson learned. By fostering their independence within the walls of our home, I not only nurtured their growth but also kept the ties of our relationship tightly woven, reminding us all that love doesn't fade in the face of responsibility. Instead, it evolves, deepening in ways I could never have imagined. As I sit here, I can see that it isn't about the money or even the chores, it's about understanding, growth, and creating an environment where we can all be better versions of ourselves together. And while the future is uncertain, a chorus of questions still unanswered, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for this shared journey, knowing that being a parent is less about getting it right all the time and more about navigating every twist and turn with an open heart. Sometimes, I find solace in the thought of letting each of them fly with their own set of wings, ready to embrace whatever the world has in store, while I would remain here, cheering them on from the sidelines, proud of the choices we made together in this home of ours. However, as the weeks passed, I began to experience an unfamiliar unease, a gentle pressure building beneath the surface of our harmonious existence. It started with those quiet moments, sitting alone in my favorite worn-out chair while Josh and Lena collaborated at the kitchen table, their laughter and chatter creating a cozy atmosphere that made my heart swell with pride. Yet, tucked away in the corner of my mind was a prickling doubt, whispering that perhaps I had placed an unnecessary burden on their shoulders. The thoughts started to gnaw at me during sleepless nights, where thoughts raced through my mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind, questioning my decisions and choices. They did, after all, come to me during the pandemic when everything had been uncertain, their lives upended in ways I couldn't fully grasp. I remember my own parents, who had faced such trials with grit and resilience, but never once did they charge me rent. As days turned into weeks, the tight-knit bond we shared sometimes felt like it stood on shaky ground. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the joy of our routines, breakfast-making competitions, game nights peppered with sarcasm and laughter. And those afternoons when I would find them lost in their respective worlds, creativity bursting from them like blooming wildflowers. But the shadows of my thoughts lingered, lingering as a subtle reminder that their growing independence came with its own set of fears. One night, after an especially hectic day, I was cleaning up the remnants of dinner, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of clarity. I turned to them and, in a voice that quivered with a mix of uncertainty and resolve, asked if they felt the same way I did. To my surprise, their expressions turned serious, and I felt as if I had ventured into unknown territory. Josh, with his thoughtful gaze, spoke first. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We're here because you let us be ourselves, and if charging rent is part of that, then we accept it as a part of our growth." Lena, always the more intuitive one, added, "It's funny you mention this because I was worried it was our responsibility to take care of you, not the other way around." Their words, laden with sincerity, left me both relieved and bewildered. Here I was, thinking I was the one responsible for their future, yet together, we had created something profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and support. The subsequent weeks held a newfound sense of openness, the pressure lifted, replaced by unexpected lightness. We spoke often, delving into deeper conversations about financial stability, career aspirations, and dreams yet to be realized. Each discussion became a building block, forming a bridge between my worries and their understanding of adulthood, and suddenly, Josh and Lena were no longer just my children, but partners in a shared journey of life. As we moved further into this phase of our lives, I began to find joy in the small victories, the little projects that each of them undertook that ventured into adulthood's daunting reality, with me as a spectator cheering them on in the background. One evening, each of them sat next to me, Josh back from a successful project pitch, Lena having submitted her first freelance article, the air thick with accomplishment. I placed my hand on theirs, a silent acknowledgement of our collective achievements, a bond that transcended the need for rent or adulting responsibilities. They were soaring, and I realized I was simply here to help them acclimate to the winds beneath their wings. And so our story evolved, settling into a rhythm that felt genuine and nurturing. It was about more than money or bills, it was about lessons learned under our roof, and I cherished the thought that perhaps I hadn't been the asshole after all. It was merely the ebb and flow of family dynamics shifting. With nights spent under the gentle glow of lamplight discussing prospects and dreams, I understood that being together, sharing our fears and aspirations, had emboldened us, allowing for a new understanding about what it means to navigate adulthood together. As we moved further into this unknown future, I embraced it. The unknown no longer felt like a weight but a canvas awaiting our colors. Perhaps being a parent is knowing when to let the reins go, and I felt ready for whatever paths lay ahead. The uncertainty didn't haunt me anymore, it ignited a sense of adventure. So, maybe in this journey, I was never an asshole, but rather just a guide, and we were collectively painting a beautiful masterpiece of our shared lives. I never thought I would find myself in a position where I'd owe money to the mafia, but here I am, staring at the wall of my dimly lit apartment, feeling the weight of my decisions clawing at my throat. My life was simple enough before this mess, filled with late nights at the coffee shop where I worked, a smattering of friends who never quite grasped the depths of my anxiety, and a degree in art I never used. It all started with that rogue decision to lend some cash to my cousin, Alex, who promised he'd pay me back but instead fell further into a spiral of debts he couldn't manage. I was naive, thinking that I could trust him and would be shielded from the troubles that followed. Just a few weeks later, a couple of intimidating figures showed up at my door, their tattoos swirling with ominous tales, their expressions stern. I remember how my heart raced as I tried to follow their conversation. It was a blurring mix of threats and cold promises, all hinting that my cousin had taken a loan from them, one with terms I never wanted to know. They demanded my help to settle his debts, a fair share, they claimed, but it was more than I could ever afford, leaving me with an insurmountable weight. My anxiety turned into sheer panic as the reality of my situation sank in. Every night afterward was filled with sleepless worry as I stared at the ceiling, visions of their faces creeping into my thoughts, fueling my fears that I might be their next target if I couldn't scrape together the cash. I tried talking to Alex, but he simply shrugged off his responsibility, deep in denial as he licked his wounds and wallowed in his futile dreams of success. Friends, whenever I attempted to confide in them, would bless me with that infuriatingly sympathetic look, thinking that my plight was simply a relatable tale from the rat race of adulthood, but in reality, I was grappling with monster-like figures lurking in the corners of my reality. I spent countless nights pacing, gathering excuses for when they would come knocking again, unable to shake the feeling that I was being suffocated by the tightrope I've had to walk ever since that awful day. Days turned into weeks, and my stress began manifesting physically, headaches that wouldn't relent, that churning stomach, the way my hands trembled whenever I heard a knock at the door, and how every unfamiliar face in the grocery store made me flinch with panic. But then, there came a strange moment of clarity. I realized I couldn't live my life in fear any longer. The chaos had spiraled into a prison of my own making. That night, I took a deep breath and flipped my phone open, scrolling through my contacts until I reached one person I hadn't spoken to in months, my childhood friend Jamie. Jamie had dipped her toes into the world of freelance journalism, and while I had always admired her tenacity, I was a little ashamed for not keeping in touch. We talked for hours, and after I poured my heart out about Alex and the mafia, she listened without judgment, her voice soothing and steady. Somehow, amidst all the panic, I found strength in just sharing my burden, and Jamie agreed to help in any way she could. Together, we crafted a plan, not to pay the debts I owed, but to confront the situation with clarity. She called in favors from her contacts, learning more about the mafia's operations in our city and finding potential loopholes I could exploit to shield myself from any violent repercussions. It wasn't a foolproof plan, and it required a lot of deep breaths and late-night strategizing, but I finally felt like I was regaining control. I never did find the money to pay off those debts, nor did I plan to. Instead, I cut off any ties with Alex and contacted local authorities to report the escalating threats I had been receiving. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I discovered strength in the vulnerability of asking for help. As I sit on my couch now, huddled in my blanket, I think about how the confrontation turned into a bittersweet closure for me, and although I'm still buried in the remnants of what my life used to be, I'm on my way to rebuilding it. No longer a pawn in someone else's mess, I finally glimpse a future not overshadowed by debt or despair. And who knows, maybe one day, I'll be able to recount this experience with laughter rather than anxiety. Update: it's been a few months since I faced those demons, and while my finances are still shaky, I've taken the plunge into freelance work myself, learning graphic design to help others express their stories as mine once were silenced. I still hear about Alex, and the troubling stories coming from our old neighborhood, but the thought of returning to that life of shame and fear makes my heart feel lighter. I'm still working through it all, one graphic at a time. As the months rolled on, I found solace in the rhythmic cadence of my new freelance life, where each keystroke and brushstroke brought me deeper into a world where creativity flourished, unfettered by the chains of past mistakes. I had made a conscious choice to leave behind the weight of my debts and the lingering shadow of that encounter with the mafia. It was as if I had finally taken off a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small. My small apartment morphed into an art studio, with sketches lining the walls and a cluttered desk that spoke to the fervor of my newfound passions. While the stained glass light of the setting sun streamed through my window, I was propelled by an insatiable urge to tell stories, my own stories, but also those of others who had suffered the same silencing I once endured. I reflected on the way the narrative had transformed within me, where once I felt shackled by shame, I now carried a sense of purpose, using my experiences not only to avoid the dark clutches of my past but to illuminate the paths of others. Freelancing was unpredictable, and some weeks the tenuous security of my finances tugged at my nerves, but each job brought in just enough to keep me afloat, like a small buoy in choppy waters. One particular project, a visual narrative about the struggles of an up-and-coming musician trapped under the thumb of a greedy label, struck a chord with me. As I crafted illustrations that mirrored his struggles, I recalled the tight grip of fear that once held my world in check. I couldn't help but channel some of my own anxieties into that work. It felt comforting to remember that artists often pulled from their wells of pain, transforming turmoil into something beautiful. And with each completed assignment, a thrill coursed through me, not just because of the paycheck but because I was helping someone tell their story, lifting it from the confines of silence. But still, there were days when silence became an unwelcome visitor, nudging me with memories of that life I had fled. I occasionally ran into old acquaintances from the neighborhood during errand runs, their faces painted with lingering questions that only I could read. I felt their curiosity piercing through the tentative smiles they offered. Did I ever pay off my debts? Was I still in danger of repercussions? I found myself dodging these encounters, feeling as if they were unwelcome echoes of a past I wished to bury. Despite this unease, I strategically avoided any discussions surrounding that chapter of my life, substituting small talk with a wall of careful deflection. The further I drifted from Alex, the friend who had led me to those dark shores, the more I began to understand that this new boundary was necessary. I still cared for what he once meant to me, but friendships shaped in desperation often lost their footing, particularly in the face of dire circumstances. There were days when I felt the pangs of guilt, remembering how I had distanced myself from him, yet I reminded myself that sometimes the hardest decisions are those we make for our own well-being. I had to be my own priority, and in this, I understood that self-care was essential in untying myself from the anchors of fear I had once known. Life took on a different rhythm after that. I kept to my routine of early mornings filled with coffee and quiet contemplation, where I regrouped and recharged before jumping into the whirlwind of deadlines and projects. I reached out to supportive platforms online where I could share what I had learned about graphic design, allowing me to inspire others hoping to escape from their own silent stories. Every connection felt like an act of reclamation. I soon realized that while life's challenges might not erase themselves, we hold the power to choose how we face them. And just when I thought I had built up enough distance from my intertwined past, I received a message one night, a notification that sent a chill down my spine. It was a cryptic message from a number I didn't recognize, void of any context, simply reading, "We need to talk." My heart raced and dread pooled in my stomach. Had Alex reached out? Or was there someone else looking to pull me back into that life, a reminder that I could never truly escape the consequences of my choices? In the end, I chose hope over fear, deciding to respond. I was done with the shadows of my past. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about standing firm in the life I had built. If there was any offer or threat lurking behind that message, I would face it head on, not as the scared person I once was, but as an empowered individual who learned to express rather than suppress. With every breath, I reminded myself that I owed my life to those unyielding graphics I created, each a testament to resilience, an ode to stories that needed to be shared. If there was anything I had learned from this chapter, it's that I wouldn't let my past dictate my future. One way or another, I would write my own ending. As the months rolled by, I found myself lost in the rhythm of my new life, my mornings filled with the sound of digital brushes sweeping across my tablet, and my evenings immersed in a vibrant community of fellow creators who understood the struggles of battling inner demons. Those dark days of financial turmoil and mob connections felt like distant memories, mere shadows in the bright glow of my newfound identity. But every so often, a chill would creep into my soul, and I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the looming figures from my past return to collect what was owed. It was in those moments that I focused on the projects at hand, pouring my heart into each design as if it were my very lifeline. I attended design meetups and workshops, shared my works in progress on social media, and even started offering my services to local nonprofits, knowing how healing storytelling can be. I spoke with clients who, like me, carried burdens of their own, and through visual narratives, I could help them uncover and express their truths, much like my own. Yet, inquisitiveness sometimes took over, especially when I heard whispers about Alex, my old neighbor whose heavy footsteps and menacing glances had once suffocated me with fear. Rumors traveled through our circles like wildfire, tales of his increasingly desperate and reckless actions. It made me a bit anxious, knowing that he could still be out there. One night, after a long day of collaborating on a mural for mental health awareness, I found myself at a local cafe, fiddling with the remnants of my latte, contemplating whether I should reach out to some of my old friends. I wanted to ask, just to get some sense of the neighborhood without stepping back into the lion's den. Hesitations bubbled within me, a mix of urgency and dread, knowing that once you tread back into someone else's world, your past could pull you back in like a riptide. But ultimately, I decided to stay put, cloaked in the security of my new identity. I busied myself with deadlines, balancing aesthetics with client expectations, and reveling in the flow of creativity. Soon, my portfolio burgeoned with pieces that resonated with people far and wide, art both whimsical and sobering. However, what started as therapy gradually morphed into a burgeoning business, and as my confidence grew, so too did my ambition. I scheduled a meeting with a small gallery, eager to showcase my work, relishing the thought of presenting my stories in a public forum, where perhaps others could find healing and inspiration. The night of the gallery opening was a mosaic of excitement and anxiety. I wore a dress that felt too tight and polished my illustrations to pristine perfection. As I stood by my booth, chatting with curious onlookers about my creative process, I felt a sense of pride enveloping me. For the first time, I could see the fruits of my labor unfolding, liberating stories grasping for air in this vibrant, public space. But deep down, the familiar gnawing of insecurity persisted. What if someone recognized me as the girl who had been tangled in mafia ties? Then, just as I found solace in the supportive chatter around me, the door swung open, and my heart sank. There he stood, Alex, just as I remembered him, but sharper, with a hardness in his eyes that felt chillingly familiar. Time had transformed him, muting some of the buoyancy we'd once shared while hardening his features into something menacing. I thought about slinking away or hiding behind my easel, but instead, I stood my ground, breathing deeply, reminding myself of the evolution I'd undergone. The world fell silent as he approached me, a casual expression plastered over his face, piercing me with a penetrating gaze. I braced myself, ready to stand up to the image of fear I had once carried. "Congratulations," he said, his tone surprisingly even. "I heard you're doing well for yourself," he continued, scanning my artwork, which was now a testament to my resilience, my freedom. He seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the weight of uncertainty. "Thanks, Alex," I replied, my voice steady, the apprehension coiling within me like a tight spring. "You too, I've heard things." I chose my words carefully, every syllable curated to extract a hint at his intentions. He shrugged, and a shadow crossed his face, the facade managing to slip ever so slightly. "Just trying to stay afloat, like anyone else," he said, an edge creeping back into his voice, hinting at bygone days where our lives were intertwined through fear. The conversation felt like a precarious dance, and I was eager to end it before the tempo shifted unfavorably. "But things are different now," I said firmly, allowing every word to hit the air like a splash of cold water. He nodded, but I could see the faintest trace of regret flicker in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess we all change. Anyway, good to see you doing well," he muttered, stepping back, a reluctant smile grazing his lips before he vanished into the crowd. The weight of that moment hung in the air long after he left, my heart racing as adrenaline surged through me. I stepped back into my booth, enveloped by the warmth of my friends and admirers, and I felt that perhaps those old stories didn't have much power over me anymore. As the night winded down, strangers offered congratulations, and I even captured a few moments in photographs, each image creating its own narrative of overcoming and resilience. Each laugh exchanged and each compliment offered was a reminder that I had taken control of my story, rewriting it one brushstroke at a time. I may have owed my past a small portion of my existence, but my future? That was entirely mine to shape. And what a beautiful work of art it had become. I never imagined I would be caught in a struggle between my boyfriend and my father, but sometimes life throws you into the most unexpected conflicts. Growing up, my dad was my rock, the kind of guy who taught me how to ride a bike on a rickety old road, always standing close enough that I felt his presence but far enough that I had to find my balance. He expected nothing less than the best from me, and after my parents' divorce when I was 12, he stepped up to play both roles, becoming fiercely protective of me. I fell in love with Caleb during my sophomore year of college. He had this effortless way of making me laugh, and I felt alive in ways I couldn't explain. Our differences were palpable. While I strived for perfection, my dad's influence still loomed large. Caleb thrived in a world of creativity and spontaneity, often nudging me to break free from my carefully crafted plans. Our relationship flourished, but there was always this looming question in my mind: would my dad approve of him? Things took a sour turn when my family invited me to dinner, a rare event since our schedules rarely aligned. I was excited to introduce Caleb to my dad, hoping they'd hit it off and I'd finally have some peace of mind regarding my father's opinions on my choices. The evening started pleasantly enough, but as the conversation turned, I felt the tension in the air when the topic of Caleb's career in graphic design came up. My father, who had always prioritized traditional paths, openly criticized Caleb's work, dismissing it as a hobby rather than a viable career. I could feel my heart race as Caleb sat there, visibly uncomfortable, trying to maintain his composure while my father launched into a monologue about the virtues of financial security and a stable job. I had been quiet, biting my tongue, but suddenly, I felt this surge of protectiveness swell within me. "Dad, that's unfair," I finally said. "Caleb works hard for what he does. Being a creative doesn't mean he isn't ambitious." The moment my words left my mouth, the room went eerily silent. I held my breath, anticipating my father's reaction as the tension seemed to cling to the walls. He frowned, his disappointment palpable. "You shouldn't be defending him, Ava. You need to look out for yourself, not this boy who can't even provide stability." I felt a flash of anger stir up my insides, blurring that well-practiced boundary of respect I usually maintained. "I'm not defending him, Dad, I'm defending what I believe in. He's passionate and talented, and honestly, I think you're missing the bigger picture." Caleb shot me a grateful glance, but I could tell the weight of scrutiny had doubled. The conversation spiraled. My dad chastised me for placing my love life above my future, and I accused him of living in a box built by his own rigid beliefs. It was an unusual role reversal. My voice seemed to overpower his, yet in the pit of my stomach lingered this heavy sense of dread. Was I being unreasonable? As emotions continued to clash, I realized I felt torn. Here was my dad, who had sacrificed so much for me, and on the other hand, Caleb, who had become my world in such a short time. I saw how frustrated Caleb was becoming and how my dad's words seemed to chip away at his self-esteem, even if he tried to hide it with that charming smile. "I think I need to go," Caleb finally said, his tone strained, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I watched as he stood up, the vulnerability in his posture cutting deeper than any argument could. My chest tightened, and I fought the urge to call him back, but instead, I just stood there, caught in this awful limbo of loyalty and love. After he'd left, my father said, "See, Ava? That's exactly what I'm talking about." But his words only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let this end here. I spent days reflecting on that dinner as I kept in touch with Caleb, our conversations growing sweet and tender through late-night texts. I realized I needed to stand up for our love, to carve my own path rather than allow my father's expectations to influence my decisions. It took a few more awkward dinners and conversations, but slowly, I began to cultivate this new understanding between us. I invited Caleb over for coffee one afternoon, brainstorming ways to maybe patch things up. Eventually, I found the courage to invite my dad to meet with us again, and I explained how important Caleb was to me. I wanted my father to see beyond the surface, to understand the depth of Caleb's character, the kindness, the creativity, the way he believed in me just as fiercely as my dad did. When the day came for us to sit down together, my hands were clammy with nerves. I was shocked to see Caleb and my dad shake hands, both visibly tense. But this time, my voice held steadiness as I guided the conversation, sharing stories about Caleb's projects and aspirations. There were moments of quiet where skepticism hung in the air, but slowly, I watched as my dad's expression shifted, curiosity taking the place of disdain. They even exchanged a few laughs, and by the end of the afternoon, my dad begrudgingly admitted that he underestimated the depth of Caleb's passion. I could feel a weight lift off my shoulders, a tentative bridge being built between the two most important men in my life. Looking back now, I can't help but reflect on those swirling emotions and the daunting task of reconciling family expectations with love. My father's approval is still something I hold dear, and while Caleb and I still face challenges regarding our paths, we've grown stronger for it. I can wholeheartedly say that standing up for what I believe in was the right choice. Sometimes, love needs defense, especially when it's challenged by those who care about us most. Update: after that dinner, things have genuinely improved. My dad even asked to see some of Caleb's artwork, and I caught him smiling at a few pieces. It's still a work in progress, but I feel like we're finally striking a balance. Caleb has a small exhibition coming up, and my dad is planning to attend. Who knows, maybe they'll bond over creativity after all. I'm ready for whatever comes next, holding love and family close. It's been a few weeks since that dinner where tensions ran high but ultimately led to some breakthroughs. I've been thinking a lot about how love isn't just a feeling but a series of choices we make, sometimes in the face of opposition. My relationship with Caleb feels more solid than ever now. Each evening, after long days spent at work, we'd return to my cozy little apartment filled with the scent of his latest cooking experiments, usually something vibrant and aromatic. I would sit at the kitchen island, watching him chop vegetables with deft hands while sharing stories about our day, the comfort of his presence melting away the stresses of the outside world. He often joked about his own art, claiming that cooking was just another form of creativity, albeit with delicious results. The laughter that bounced off the walls during these moments felt like little victories, reminders of the bond we were nurturing together. However, the shadow of that family dinner lingered in my mind, especially as I grew excited about the upcoming exhibition. Caleb had poured his heart, his very essence, into his art, and I was both proud and anxious. Would my dad truly come? The thought of my two worlds colliding was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. One afternoon, I was organizing the invites for the exhibition in our shared workspace. I came across a beautiful canvas that Caleb had kept under wraps. It was his latest piece, a vibrant abstract bursting with swirls of color, emotion radiating from every brushstroke. I asked him about it, and he reluctantly revealed that it was inspired by his struggles, his feelings of insecurity, of being a misfit in a world that seemed to favor conventional status quos. As he described his process, I could see the passion in his eyes. A thought crossed my mind: if my dad could see beyond the surface, maybe he could understand Caleb's journey, the vulnerability he infused into every work of art. The day of the exhibition arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. The gallery echoed with the anticipatory energy of art lovers and critics mingling in hushed tones, their gazes swept across the canvas walls. When I finally spotted my dad entering, his expression was inscrutable. Caleb gave him a genuine smile from across the room, his enthusiasm palpable, and I squeezed my hands together, silently urging my dad to let his guard down. As the evening progressed, I caught snippets of conversation. My dad scrutinized the artwork, sharing anecdotes with fellow attendees, and to my relief, I noticed his expression soften when he commented on one of Caleb's pieces. They eventually gravitated toward each other, and before I knew it, Caleb was showcasing his work, sharing not only the artistic techniques but the stories woven into each piece. The highlight of the night was when Caleb revealed that the colorful abstract I had seen earlier represented the complexity of human emotion, the very thing that often isolates us. My heart swelled with pride, and I watched my dad through the crowd as confusion gave way to understanding. He listened intently, a flicker of something like admiration flickering in his eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief, allowing myself to hope that this exhibition wasn't merely a stepping stone for Caleb, it also served as a bridge between my father's skepticism and Caleb's dreams. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but notice the moments of laughter shared between them, two souls who had once clashed but were now stepping cautiously into the light of each other's worlds. After the exhibition, I found the two of them standing slightly apart, discussing art. I felt a surge of warmth, they were laughing, the walls that had divided them starting to crumble. My dad even complimented Caleb, saying he admired his unique approach. Those words settled like a sweet balm over my heart, soothing the worries that had kept me awake at night. As I moved closer, catching snippets of conversation, I realized that my hope wasn't misplaced. They were talking openly, sharing their perspectives, and I felt as if I were witnessing a new chapter unfold before my eyes. Later that night, when Caleb and I lay side by side on our couch, the glow of the city lights filtering through the window, I couldn't contain my excitement. "I think they really connected tonight," I whispered, my voice barely breaking the comfortable silence. He nodded slowly, tracing patterns on my arm as a smile spread across his face. "Your dad has a lot of wisdom. I just hope he sees that my work comes from a place of honesty," I reassured him, my heart racing. "He does, he really does. I felt it, Caleb. Whatever it is, we're making progress." He wrapped me close, and I realized, in that moment, that love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about creating a little sanctuary amidst the chaos of conflicting lives. When we support one another, we create spaces for understanding, transformation, and healing. As I drifted to sleep that night, visions of the exhibition danced in my mind, vignettes of laughter, creativity, and warmth. Perhaps the road ahead still held challenges, but we were ready for them, carrying love and family close to our hearts, ever hopeful for what lay ahead. The day of Caleb's exhibition arrived, and I stood before the mirror, adjusting my hair and replaying the countless scenarios in my mind. Each thought seemed to intertwine like threads in a tapestry, weaving together excitement and apprehension. What if my dad was still skeptical? What if Caleb felt uncomfortable in the spotlight? But as I stepped into the living room, I found myself inexplicably buoyed by the bright morning light streaming through the window, illuminating the tight-knit atmosphere of anticipation that surrounded us. Caleb paced nervously, tiny flecks of paint smudged on his hands, remnants of late-night creativity. He caught my eye and smiled, a mix of vulnerability and pride gracing his features, and I knew this moment mattered more than the fear swirling in my mind. We arrived at the gallery, an eclectic space bursting with vibrant colors and the chatter of other artists and patrons. My heart raced as we walked through the entrance, the walls adorned with Caleb's pieces, each stroke, each color, an echo of his soul. Glancing towards my dad's reserved expression, I noticed a flicker of curiosity beneath his stoic demeanor. It was as if he stepped into an entirely new world where the art spoke louder than words, unearthing emotions that had long often been buried. As the evening unfolded, friends gathered, laughter floated through the air, and more than a handful of warm exchanges transpired, my connection with Caleb growing deeper amidst the shared joy around us. My dad, quietly attentive, lingered near one of Caleb's larger pieces, a brilliant depiction of a stormy ocean met by a delicate sunrise. I could see his brow furrowed slightly, and in that moment, I felt this strange mix of hope and dread. What was he thinking? Caleb approached, his own uncertainty evident, but to my astonishment, my dad struck up a conversation, sparking a dialogue about the inspiration behind the painting. As I hovered nearby, pretending to examine other works while holding my breath, I listened to them exchange thoughts on creation and passion, their faces lighting up with every shared enthusiasm. There was something extraordinary about that moment, watching my worlds collide, like the sun breaking through clouds. I found myself reflecting on how art can bridge gaps, creating shared experiences that foster understanding. It wasn't just the bonds we cherished with those we love, it was also about allowing them to redefine assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of. Hours slipped by in a slow, colorful dance of connection, and as the gallery began to wind down, Caleb offered my dad a framed piece that he hadn't intended to display. It was a small canvas of a sunset casting hues of orange and lavender over a silhouetted shoreline, the waves gently lapping at one another, capturing the serenity of nature, themes of hope and possibility layered within the brushstrokes. "I thought you might appreciate this," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tension that still lingered in the air. Dad's expression softened as he accepted the gift, his fingers tracing over the edges of the frame, seeming to absorb its significance. It was as if all the barriers that once existed were systematically crumbling right before my eyes. Dad glanced up at Caleb, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of recognition, a sense of understanding that transcended boundaries. "I'd like to learn more about your work, Caleb," he said, and the words hung in the air like music, sweet and unhurried. After the exhibition, I found myself drawing a breath of relief, my body instinctively relaxing. We drove home in a comfortable silence, Caleb's hand clasped tightly in mine. The possibilities of a reconciled relationship between my dad and the love of my life felt tangible, like the name of a spell whispered in the dark. As days turned into weeks, my dad consistently asked about Caleb's latest projects, engaged in conversations with full-blown enthusiasm, and I witnessed the transformation of two previously disconnected worlds. Our family dinners transitioned from awkward silences to lively discussions, laughter spilling around the table as stories unfolded like delicate origami. Reflecting on the journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. It was undeniably hard navigating love between family and partners, and yet it seemed we were learning to make room for all that life threw at us. Even simple moments, sharing our thoughts over dinner, visiting the gallery again, or watching the sunset together, redefined our connections in a fresh light. After a month, Caleb humorously dubbed my dad his new art critic. I could only laugh, grateful for the emergence of something so beautiful from what had once felt so threatening. The path ahead remained full of surprises, but we'd walk it hand in hand, a little more resilient with every stride. And every night, as I tucked myself into bed, my heart overflowed, cocooned within the safety of love and the newfound bond of family. This interconnectedness, was more than I had ever hoped for. Each day was a testament to what could be achieved when love was held fiercely amidst life's unexpected challenges, slowly morphing into something rare and profound. The horizons before us now stretched far and wide, yet still, under the painted stars, I felt a sense of peace knowing we were ready to embrace all that lay ahead. There I was, standing in the corner of a dimly lit room, watching as people laughed and mingled, the soft thrum of music setting a carefree backdrop to the evening. It was supposed to be a fun night out, a chance for me to impress Melissa, my date, who had caught my eye a few weeks ago at the coffee shop where I worked. We had hit it off swiftly, sharing jokes and secrets over cups of steaming lattes, and on that Friday night, I felt hopeful that this party would deepen our connection. But a mere hour into the gathering, my excitement began to dwindle as a strange pit of disappointment settled in my stomach. I had made my way to the bar to grab water, feeling slightly parched from the small talk I had been engaging in. I turned to Melissa and asked if she would mind grabbing 2 glasses while I full-on chatted with a few friends who had arrived. With a playful smile, she agreed. Minutes passed, and I noticed her standing at the bar, chatting with some of her friends and completely neglecting my request. I could feel a sense of annoyance creeping up me. It wasn't that big of a favor. I mean, how hard was it to just fill a glass with water? When I finally got her attention, I decided to approach the bar myself, making my way through the warm crowd. I didn't want to make a scene, but as I reached the counter, claims of thirst whispered in my mind. When I returned with my 2 glasses, I found her laughing with a group, her head thrown back in mirth, showing no signs of having noticed my absence. I felt a mix of irritation and frustration clashing within me. Shouldn't she have cared that I was waiting? After all, if the roles were reversed, wouldn't I have done the same for her? I set the glasses down, approached her too calm demeanor, and quipped lightly, "Did you not hear me ask for water?" Her response was more flippant than I had anticipated, akin to waving a dismissive hand at a child's tantrum. "Chill out. It's just water. We're having fun, aren't we?" I had considered myself easygoing, perhaps even too easy at times, but this felt different. I wasn't just parched, I felt like an afterthought. I thought about trying to shrug it off, to laugh with her, and pretend her nonchalance didn't bother me. Yet that wasn't the case. Something deep inside tugged at me, urging me to pay attention to the growing fissure in our evening. "You wouldn't want to take water to someone else, would you?" Her chuckle faded. Clearly, I had struck a nerve, but instead of a calm discussion, I was met with her raised eyebrows and a tone that meant an impending storm. I felt my stomach churn as a deeper realization set in for me. This wasn't just about water, it felt like our dynamic was revealing an underlying issue. These clues stripped the evening of all its sweetness. I stepped away from the group, indicating I needed a breather. I felt guilt wash over me. I liked her. Was I really about to let a glass of water become the reason I'd leave? After taking a moment in the rear garden, surrounded by the muted sounds of the party drifting through the open door, something shifted. I didn't want to keep fighting for her attention. It stung, but leaving felt like reclaiming a small piece of my dignity. As I walked out, I glanced back at Melissa, immersed in her laughter, oblivious, and I realized that sometimes, situations highlight the disparities in how people value one another. I felt a bittersweet relief washing over me. Deep down, I knew this wasn't a friendship destined to grow. Later that night, as I lay sprawled in my room under softly glowing fairy lights, I reflected on what happened. Maybe I wasn't the biggest villain, perhaps, it was time to revamp what I sought in relationships. Maybe my needs were simple but important, and if she couldn't meet them, or even acknowledge them, that was worth noting. That little moment revealed more about her indifference, and ultimately, I would rather spend my time with someone who wouldn't just quench my physical thirst, but my emotional one as well. Update: a few days passed, and Melissa texted me, casually asking when we could hang out again. I considered the message, my mind aligning all the reasons to say no. Instead, I replied honestly. I mentioned that I appreciated the good times but felt like we were on different wavelengths, and perhaps it was best to part ways. To my surprise, she responded quickly, expressing mild frustration but also acceptance. "I guess we just weren't meant to be," she replied, a little too nonchalantly. I sat there staring at my phone. Yes, it was bittersweet, but it also felt liberating, like I was finally setting my own boundaries, opening up space for someone who might just care enough to hand me a glass of water when I asked for it. I set my phone down, staring blankly at the room around me, filled with the soft hues of early evening light filtering through the sheer curtains. The silence seemed thicker now, as if the air had gained weight after our exchange. I found myself reflecting not only on that last date but on that entire week, the parties I had attended, the conversations that felt more like choreographed performances than genuine connections. My heart had pangs of loneliness even amidst laughter and chatter. It was all so superficial. I cherished depth, but depth seemed harder to find. I thought about that moment at the party when all I had wanted was a simple glass of water. It felt monumental then, a test of sorts. Would he care enough to step away from his own fun for just a minute to make sure I was comfortable? But instead, I had been met with uncomfortable laughter and a flippant brush-off, the kind of casual dismissal that stung far more deeply than anyone could have anticipated. As I wandered into the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the cupboard door and winced. My eyes looked tired, a little sad. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for anyway. Some validation? Understanding? Or perhaps just a partner who saw me as I truly was, rather than a checklist they could tick off at a party. Sipping the warm tea, I tried to focus my thoughts. I could feel the echoes of their laughter still surrounding me, but rather than drown in it, I wanted to find a way out into the quiet. I wanted to rediscover myself in the silence. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed busy, working through stacks of paperwork during the day, and on weekends, I buried myself in hobbies I had neglected, a long-forgotten passion for painting took precedence one afternoon as I dipped my brush into vibrant colors. Each stroke on the canvas seemed to soothe my restlessness, allowing buried emotions to flow out, a startling catharsis emerging from the swirl of blues and greens. Yet amid that serenity, I couldn't shake off the tangled cords of loneliness. Somewhere deep down, I still craved companionship, a connection that felt real. By the time I got the invite for a friend's upcoming birthday party, I hesitated, contemplating whether I should go. This time, however, the thought didn't fill me with dread. In fact, it carried a sense of anticipation. I dressed up that evening with a newfound liveliness. I chose an outfit that made me feel confident, a pair of bright, flowy pants and a top that shimmered just enough to catch the light. Maybe, with a little luck, I would meet someone who understood the value of communication, even for small things like water. It would be clear from the start that I wanted more, a dual respect that could blossom in little interactions. Once at the party, I first wandered toward the snack table, grabbing a few bites while scanning the crowd. I laughed as I recognized familiar faces and exchanged pleasantries. For the first time in a while, I felt weightless in my own skin, unburdened by expectations, both from myself and the people around me. Eventually, I found a quiet corner on the patio, where soft music fueled gentle conversations. I admired the way the stars began to twinkle above. It was mesmerizing, grounding, and perhaps inviting for possibilities. That's when she approached, Maya, an acquaintance from a mutual circle. She had a genuine smile that lit up her face, and her laughter resonated with warmth and candor. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to her, as if we were old friends catching up. Mid-conversation, I asked her if I could grab a glass of water and, to my delight, she immediately grabbed mine and her cup matter-of-factly, sliding them both toward me without second-guessing. As she casually remarked how important hydration could be, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since that last encounter, I felt seen, as if I had been handed a lifeline rather than just a drink. Over the next hour, we shared stories about life, quirky hobbies, travel dreams, and the absurdity of dating mishaps. I felt my heart lightening as I realized the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pretense, just two people connecting over shared experiences and laughter. It didn't matter if this led anywhere romantic, it was the dialogue and the companionship that felt renewing. Amidst all this, I could feel my earlier hesitations fading away, not because I feared being alone, but because here, in this little pocket of the universe, I knew I had worth, and I wouldn't settle for anything less. As the night wound down, we exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch, both of us leaving perhaps with the potential for friendship or something deeper. Walking home under the starlit sky, I took a deep breath, a smile drawing across my lips. I didn't feel like I had lost it all, rather, I felt that I was finally starting to gain everything I wanted, not just in a partner, but also the self-assurance of knowing what I deserved. In the days that followed, I wondered if any of this would lead anywhere more than light-hearted chats over coffee. Still, the journey of rediscovering myself felt infinitely more significant than focusing on finding a romantic partner. As those weeks turned into months, each conversation with Maya, no matter how simple, helped build a foundation that eventually turned delightful, sometimes surprising. I realized it was always the little things that mattered, just like a glass of water did that night. I chuckled softly to myself, reflecting that maybe, finally, I had learned to navigate my own path, and perhaps I had even found someone who could walk alongside it, glass in hand, genuinely invested in more than just where life would lead us. And so, as I curled up on my couch one quiet evening, I felt a peace I hadn't encountered in a long time, and as I drifted off to sleep, I knew, I wasn't the asshole for leaving a party. If anything, I had made room for something far better than I had ever hoped for. The following weeks unfolded like a gentle sunrise, warm and promising. I took my time getting used to this new chapter. I was buoyed by my decision, and it sparked something within me, a renewed sense of self-worth that felt as refreshing as my long-awaited glass of water. I began to explore hobbies I had set aside for far too long, painting during the quiet afternoons, journaling under the naked branches of winter trees, and even experimenting with new recipes after a cold spell had made takeout an almost too recurrent theme. With each brushstroke or new ingredient, I felt greater clarity wash over me, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I didn't know were lost in the routine of trying to please others. Yet, while wallowing in my solitude, I found myself thinking about the deeper connections I craved. Sometimes, I'd scroll through my phone, catching snippets of conversations from my friends, discussing their heartbreaks or busy careers, which only reminded me that even in shared experiences, people saw the world so differently. It wasn't just about parties or social gatherings anymore, it was about feeling valued in the smallest acts, of someone genuinely listening to my needs. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I received a text from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long while. Jess always had the right level of kindness blended with mischief that made her captivating to be around. She wanted to know if I'd join her and a few others at a local coffee shop for an art festival starting next weekend. Memories of our spontaneous adventures flickered in my mind, and without hesitating this time, I agreed. The closer the date approached, the more I found myself alternating between excitement and apprehension. What if I froze again? What if someone needed something from me, and I felt constricted by the desire to appease? Those thoughts clung to me like shadows, but I understood they stemmed from the residual anxiety of that last party. And yet, how could I forge new memories without risking a little vulnerability? The day arrived, and the old coffee shop was even more enchanting than I remembered, with chunky vintage furniture and soft jazz humming in the background. The walls were adorned with local artists' works, vibrant colors splashed across canvases, each whispering a story I longed to dive into. Spotting Jess was easy, her laughter cut through the bustling chatter like sunlight piercing through the trees. We greeted each other with enthusiastic hugs and lingering eye contact that reassured me we were still on the same wavelength. As our group settled in, sipping on our drinks and discussing everything from art to dreams, I found solace in belonging. There was a comfort in the laughter, and despite my earlier reservations, I discovered how liberating it felt just to be seen and heard. Halfway through our gathering, I excused myself for a moment and made my way to the restroom. Glancing in the mirror, I smoothed down my hair and took a deep breath. I realized that I had spent too long doubting my worth, afraid of facing discomfort and potential heartbreak. As I returned to the table, I couldn't help but smile. I was welcomed back to the group with open arms, a seat saved beside Jess. The conversation flowed, laughter crescendoed, and someone even asked about my recent painting venture, prompting a glimmer of pride within me to share my latest piece. That evening turned into an impromptu art critique followed by plans to visit galleries around town. It felt like a tapestry of warmth was woven around us all, threading kindness, creativity, and understanding together. I left the venue feeling lighter, the tension that had momentarily wrapped around my chest uncoiling like the tendrils of dawn breaking through. As I drove home, the streetlights flickering past, I reflected on the day, a mosaic of rekindled friendships, laughter shared over cappuccinos, and the beauty of allowing myself to step outside of what once felt like looming shadows. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be genuinely present with others and myself. I realized I didn't have to mold myself into someone's ideal collection of traits to find companionship, I simply needed to allow myself to exist as I was. Looking at the horizon ahead of me, painted in nothing but the gentle hues of twilight, I whispered to myself, I'm not the asshole for leaving that party, but rather, I am the architect of my own journey, and finally, I could feel that faint hope blossoming with every step I took. It was a quiet evening when I sat down at my kitchen table, the faint smell of roasted vegetables still clinging to the air, a comforting reminder of the dinner I had enjoyed alone after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a message from an acquaintance, Anna, popped up, asking if she could come over for a casual get-together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, thoughts racing back to a party last month where Anna, with her bright smile and bubbly personality, made a bombastic introduction that was quickly overshadowed by her confession. She referred to herself as a total klepto. At the time, I had chuckled along with the other guests, brushing it off as a quirky exaggeration, but her subsequent actions raised hair on my neck. I watched, uneasy, as she slipped a bottle of wine into her bag and, just before leaving, rifled through my collection of vintage postcards while distracted by conversation. I knew I should have said something then, it would have been a golden opportunity for a teachable moment, but the laughter of friends masked my instincts as I let it slide. Now, as I read her message, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I typed a hesitant response, explaining that I had plans for the weekend and wouldn't be able to host her. Each word felt like a half-truth, a feeble wall I was trying to erect against an uninvited chaos. After sending it, I sank into an uneasy silence, replaying the moment she had look of glee when she thought no one was watching, a sort of childlike delight in taking things that weren't hers. The truth was, I didn't want that kind of energy in my home, a space I had worked hard to make a sanctuary. I loved the little treasures I had collected over the years, the mismatched teacups, the faded photographs, and the mere idea of them being subject to her klepto nature made me shudder. Days passed after my refusal, but the unease lingered like an unwelcoming guest. Our mutual friends began to ask about my decision. They wanted to know why I hadn't invited Anna, often couching their questions in a concern that felt almost mocking, as if I were the unreasonable one who had denied a friend simple hospitality. "It's just a joke, you know?" one of them remarked, laughter dancing at the edges of his voice as we stood by a fruity punch bowl. "You can't take it seriously." But I couldn't shake off the feeling. I started to wonder if I was being a bit too harsh, a bit too closed off, yet I felt the sting of their laughter in a way that didn't match my situation. Then came a text I hadn't anticipated. Anna reached out to me again, this time apologizing for her past behavior and inviting me to discuss it over coffee. A part of me wanted to engage, to hear her thoughts and perhaps offer her the understanding I had assumed she lacked. Yet another part remained on guard, caution spilling into the forefront of my mind, warning me of potential manipulation. I chose ambiguity, suggesting that we meet in a public space, something casual, allowing me to maintain the physical distance my heart craved. When the day came, we met in a quaint little cafe, the air thick with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Anna walked in, her demeanor had shifted, the confidence seemed tempered by uncertainty, her usual flamboyance stripped down to a fragile humility. She ordered a latte, and as our small talk veered into deeper waters, I found myself listening intently, her eyes pleading for comprehension, her remorse tinged with vulnerability. She spoke of her addiction, her battles with impulse control, her admission that the label klepto was more of a coping mechanism than a joke. I felt my own walls begin to crack, an understanding blossoming within the fissures of my guarded heart. It became evident that her light-hearted banter often masked a turbulent history, a story that I hadn't anticipated digging beneath the surface. I left that meeting not with a resolution but with a renewed sense of compassion towards someone I had judged too quickly. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all, but perhaps I was merely wrapped in the confines of my own fears. Eventually, as I navigated my way through my own thoughts, I decided to reach out again. I recorded a message for Anna, saying I'd like to try again, inviting her for a small gathering with a few close friends. It felt right, a balance of caution and empathy, a tentative step toward bridging the space I had drawn between us. Several weeks later, I would look back at that moment of choosing to create a connection rather than a rift. I realized something profound about people. We are all carrying unseeable burdens, and sometimes, understanding is the most potent remedy we can offer. Update: a few months have passed since our reconnection, and Anna has slowly proven herself to be a dear friend, one who respects my space and has taken steps toward managing her impulses. She even surprised me at my birthday party with a thoughtful, hand-picked gift from my favorite bookstore, something I never would have thought possible when the conversation first unfolded in that cafe. As it turns out, both our experiences shaped a new port of calm in the stormy seas of uncertainty. It had reminded me that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the strongest of bonds. As I reflect on the months that have passed since that pivotal decision, I can't help but marvel at how far Anna and I have come. There was a time when the thought of letting her into my life again felt risky, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff. It was easy to envision scenarios where her past tendencies would rear their heads, leading to a cascade of mistrust and awkward moments. However, I've come to understand that letting her in required a vulnerability I hadn't expected to offer, not just to her, but to myself. With each casual meeting, be it over coffee at our favorite little cafe or an impromptu movie night at my place, I noticed the subtle shifts. In our conversations, the laughter now echoed with a reserved familiarity rather than tension and caution. Anna sincerely worked on herself, eagerly sharing her progress and the strategies she was implementing to curb her impulses. Each time she showed up with a new accomplishment or insight, my heart melted just a bit more, swelling with awe for her courage and determination to change. One evening, as we curled up on my couch with blankets piled high and an array of snacks scattered around like a makeshift feast, our laughter filled the room, mingling seamlessly with the soft glow of the lamp casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt like home in a way I had nearly forgotten, a sanctuary where two people could be honest about their flaws without fear of judgment. I remember teasing her about her initial tendency to swipe something, a fine-looking postcard or a quirky pen, when she got overly excited. She playfully rolled her eyes, recounting a story about a time she had unintentionally taken an unusual clay figurine from a friend's house, only to return it a few days later, embarrassed and ashamed. We both laughed, and it struck me how that shared moment of vulnerability forged an even stronger connection. Her self-awareness illuminated a warmth in my heart. It was during one of those cozy evenings that I proposed we visit her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she had grown up in, just to see how things had changed. To my surprise, she agreed. As we strolled through the familiar streets, Anna pointed out buildings and shops, relaying stories from her childhood that were both endearing and bittersweet. There was a sense of nostalgia that enveloped us, and I could feel a deeper understanding blooming between us as we walked under the fluttering leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. Anna spoke vividly about her dreams and aspirations, the very ones that had often been stifled by her earlier behavior, and in that moment, I glimpsed a new layer of her, the possibility of uncharted horizons, a future reshaped by newfound accountability. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just last week, while I was out running errands, I received a frantic text from Anna, sharing how she had just been at a local busy store and felt drawn in by the rush of excitement, a familiar tension brewing within her. I could sense her panic through the screen as she admitted having slipped a decorative mug into her bag, her heart racing as she navigated the ethics of her actions in real time. My stomach twisted, I felt a flash of empathy mixed with fear. Part of me worried, was this my fault for encouraging her too much too quickly? Only moments passed before my phone buzzed again, and I read her message thanking me for being there. She confessed that when she reached her car, panic bubbled up inside her, urging her to overcome the old impulse, yet this time she chose differently. She pressed her palm against the mug, emerging as the person she aspired to be, her pulse steadying as she marched back inside to return it. I felt endless pride for her courage, and it served as a pivotal reminder of why I let her back into my life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on our journey, I realize how beautifully intertwined our lives have become. While Anna may carry the label of a total klepto in moments of levity, she is so much more than that one chapter. She is a testament to resilience, transforming an unsettling part of her identity into a space of growth and self-awareness. And who she is now, the person she has become, inspires kindness and connection in ways I genuinely didn't believe possible. Perhaps in forging a connection based on our mutual struggles, we inadvertently carved out a bond that scaffolded our souls in the chaos of living. As I look ahead, I can't help but feel curiosity for what lies down this uncharted path for us. Whatever it may be, together, we are embracing it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on that crisp autumn day when Anna sat across from me in the little cafe, her admission hanging in the air like a caustic perfume. I had braced myself for the storm that conversation could have unleashed, but instead, it had gently nudged open the door to an unexpected friendship. One chilly evening, as golden leaves swirled around outside my window, Anna and I sat curled up in my living room, a stack of books scattered between us, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the cozy space. We were laughing about our most recent adventure, her brave decision to swap out her usual baked goods for fruit and nuts at a local market, a small victory in her ongoing journey of self-regulation. Each jest carried the weight of our shared laughter and love, a testament to how far she had come since our initial meeting. I watched her, marveling at the way her eyes sparkled with pride at her choices, something I often found myself nurturing in her as she shared anecdotes about her past mishaps. It was strange to think that just months prior, I had been wary of her presence, needing to protect my own space from the chaos of her admitted kleptomania. Yet here we were, two souls in tandem, navigating the bumps of our own imperfections. In the quiet moments, I could feel vulnerability wrap around us like a warm blanket, stitching together the tearing seams of our uncertainties. We talked about the moments that had defined us, her experiences reflected in mine, and it became clear that both of us had worn masks before finally discovering a safe haven in each other. There were still echoes of the past, rumblings beneath the surface that reminded us of our journeys. Sometimes, I would catch a flicker of darkness clouding her face, a shadow of temptation that whispered if only it could persuade her just once more. But instead of fear, I felt a rush of empathy swell inside me. I had seen her taking strides, how she carried around little reminders of her commitment, like a bracelet that she fidgeted with during tense moments, a grounding anchor amid her chaotic thoughts. These days, her voices of the past had transformed from torturous howls into whispered echoes of encouragement. We had both come to recognize that acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to our flaws, but rather, learning to dance with them amid the music of life, struggling less against the rhythm and finding our own beat. With every passing day, curiosity about our future mingled with uncertainty, a blend of excitement and trepidation that accompanied me whenever I thought of where this connection might lead. We began exploring new hobbies together, pottery classes that left our hands muddied yet creative, bookshop visits where conversations would tumble into the air like soft whispers. Each activity strengthened our bond, and it became increasingly hard to imagine my life without Anna's infectious laughter. One balmy winter evening, as we sat close in front of the flickering fireplace, our shared warmth seemed to wrap around us like the flames dancing in the hearth. Anna turned to me, her voice quiet but steady, You know, I've learned so much from you, not to be afraid of the messy parts of our lives. I found that I had learned just as much from her, how authentic friendships could coax us out of our hidden corners and inspire bravery where we once only felt fear. It was then I realized what we were building together was not simply companionship, it felt like crafting a safe haven, a gathering point for two afraid hearts trying to rewrite their narratives. Still, as thoughts of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind, I understood that even within this sea of calm, the tides could shift with the slightest change. Our bond felt strong, almost etched in stone, yet challenges were part of life's intricate design, woven delicately into each sunset. As I nestled deeper into the warmth of our moments like these, I recognized that every twist in this journey would further color our story, each chapter rich with experience, growth, and perhaps an occasional storm. Yet through the tempest, I felt a newfound certainty that, no matter what, Anna and I were committed to weathering it together, brave enough to embrace whatever was waiting around the corner.